Su Qing's novel Beauty on the Crossroad. Original text 13. Dou Mansion. Now I want to talk about the situation in Dou Mansion. In such a large Dou Mansion, there are actually only 4 real masters: Mr. Dou, Mrs. Dou, young Master Dou, and Miss Dou. Mr. Dou is a very powerful man. From 4 or 5 o'clock every afternoon until the next morning, there are endless guests. The sound of playing cards is non-stop, and the smoke above the king are also endless. Mrs. Dou was chubby and had a bad temper. Even Mr. Dou was afraid of her. Therefore, although Mr. Dou often stole and petted dogs outside, he did not dare to do so blatantly. If he accidentally gave Mrs. Dou got it. Are you afraid that the little mansion will be ruined? Mr. Dou is a very handsome man, and the same is true when it comes to playing with women. If he likes a woman, he will give her money. It doesn't matter if you give more, but you can't pester her. Once the spring breeze comes, Xiaolang will be strangers, otherwise he will become angry and furious. This woman is very disadvantageous. As for Master Dou, he is just like his father in terms of lust, but his methods are not as sharp as his father's. He is easily obsessed and will give women a lot of money. But when he found out that this woman actually treated him warmly, he became angry. He was so furious that he wanted to kill the woman with a knife. So his jealousy and martial arts dramas often happened. When his mother-in-law learned about it, instead of being angry, she felt that heroes have always been lecherous since ancient times. A man who loves to play with women, well, does it mean that his endocrine system is strong? That is, he is energetic. Are there any men like this who are not very developed? According to the horoscope, luck in love is good luck. When a person is happy, who would not want to have fun if he has money? However, Mr. Dou thinks that playing with women is just a kind of fun, and he must not take it too seriously, let alone harm his career and reputation. Mrs. Dou thinks that this woman is simply blind if she doesn't know that she likes her son. Bitch, you should give her a good life and let her know how powerful the Dou family is. The young master felt the road, so every time he encountered a nail, he always cried to his mother. Mrs. Dou also stood up for her son several times, but Mr. Dou always dissuaded her when she learned about it. He spoke very humorously. Everyone turned their anger into laughter and stopped getting angry. Even if the woman suffers a loss, Mr. Dou is willing to spend some money to ask someone to comfort her with kind words. If the woman is fearful and virtuous, nothing will happen to her. This is what Mr. Dou often likes to say to others, thinking it is his passion and kindness. Miss Dou is my student. She is only 11 years old this year. She has a sallow complexion and thin skin. She has had countless injections, but to no avail. Her parents had too much hope for their children, and they wanted to train her to become a socialite. Therefore, in addition to studying in a certain church primary school, they also asked me to tutor her after school, hired a foreign woman to teach her how to play the piano, and hired the piano player came to play her voice, and took her to various social events. I felt that she was busy studying all day long, changing clothes, greeting people, saluting, and eating. Her small body really couldn't support it. I am very worried that she will suddenly become ill one day. There is also a woman in the Dou Mansion who is half master and half servant. Everyone calls her Miss Wang. Speaking of Miss Wang, she is over 30 years old and has a mediocre appearance. People say she is Mr. Dou's little wife. It seems that they are very casual. Maybe she is a concubine who is not favored and has no name. Mrs. Dou, he was not jealous of her at all. She helped Mrs. Dou with the housekeeping and seemed to be very loyal, but not necessarily capable. So Mrs. Dou herself still received a lot of hard work. She accompanied Mrs. Dou like a shadow, knitting woolen clothes all day long. Some of these clothes belonged to Mrs. Dou, some belonged to Miss Dou, and some Mrs. Dou asked her to knit them one by one and give them to others. That year Dou, my wife, also asked her to wear a tight-fitting vest for me. It was very close-fitting, but she really doesn't like me. Somehow she was jealous of me. She was not jealous that Mr. Dou treated me well, but in her opinion, Mrs. Dou seemed to think more highly of me than she did. So she hated him. I don't have much else but to remain silent and refuse to talk much, so I have fewer opportunities to humiliate myself. Although Mrs. Dou doesn't necessarily like me very much, she still has to be quite polite to me. I know I have a bad temper, so whenever I had the opportunity to be alone with Miss Wang, I always make excuses to avoid hearing her say inappropriate words. I also avoided Mr. Dou when I met him, especially when no one else was around. Sometimes Mr. Dou wanted to talk to me when he was happy, but I would always give him a few serious answers and then walk away. Therefore, Mrs. Dou seems to be satisfied with this, but Miss Wang has no way of finding a matchmaker. Mr. Dou, on the other hand, is always greeted with smiles by women wherever he goes. Now that there are people like me who don't take him seriously, it feels strange to him. Once, Mrs. Dou smiled and said to everyone, "Miss Zhang is a very good character. A woman should be as dignified as she is, but if she is too loyal, she will suffer a loss." She probably meant that I cannot control my husband, and I'm not good at accompanying my wives to the company to buy things. So she thought I was useless. Mr. Dou laughed and said, "Do you think she is just loyal but not smart and capable? If she succeeds, she might become the Queen Mother of the West." I was shocked when I heard this. I was afraid that Mrs. Dou would be suspicious of me from now on. At the same time, I felt in my heart. But I was also a little happy, because a person would always rather be said to be bad and smart than to be thought of as stupid. From then on, I couldn't help but feel a bit like a confidant towards Mr. Dou. But Mrs. Dou refused to believe this. She just laughed it off and didn't mind at all. Mrs. Dou is indeed a relatively smart and capable woman, but unfortunately she is less knowledgeable, so her conversation and behavior are always somewhat vulgar. If she could study in a foreign missionary school for a few years, she might be able to become a famous lady. Although women who come from foreign missionary schools still have a vulgar look. I often see her standing at the head of the stairs and scolding the tailor for being unscrupulous, for not making the clothes to her liking, and for asking for money for drinks during festivals. According to her, regular customers should even receive a discount on their wages. Later, she gave me the so-called unsatisfactory clothes that were made, but not worn because my waist was relatively thin. At that time, she still reluctantly carried them. Shani said to me, "You can't even buy this kind of material now, Miss Zhang. Although this is a bit too big for you, you'd better not change it to a smaller size. Maybe you'll gain weight next year. I'm like you at this age. My waist is much smaller than yours. It's a pity because of the material. But in fact, I feel very uncomfortable wearing this dress because the color is too bright, and the pattern is too big and boring. They don't like this kind of clothes that they think are beautiful." Mr. Dou saw me once and said to me with a smile, "Is this the dress my wife gave you? It's so beautiful." I felt that his words were definitely not sincere. Somehow, I always believe that he must be if he has an eye for aesthetics. He must not like colorful materials like me. At the same time, I hated Mrs. Dou for telling her husband such a trivial matter and giving me the clothes she didn't want to wear. This hurt my self-esteem. So my face turned red, and after a while I whispered, "This dress, it's very good, but Mrs. Dou's clothes match her." I think Mr. Dou knew my opinion immediately. He smiled and nodded. "In the future, I will give you some clothes with elegant colors. Your figure very good." I glanced at him and walked away. Later, I didn't know that it was Mr. Dou who ordered it. Mrs. Dou thought of it herself. She actually picked out a piece of light gray woolen cloth and said she wanted to give me a piece of Changsha material. She asked me what my size was, and I said it was about 3.5 feet long. She didn't believe it, so she took a ruler and measured it horizontally and vertically behind my back. She gave me a 6.5-foot single piece, folded in half to make a short-sleeve Changsha. I'm only 3 feet 2 inches tall, and even the tailor said the material I bought for this dress was too harsh, and I felt bad. And she also boasts of her expertise in tailoring. "What do tailors know?" she said. "They only know how to polish clothes and fabrics. It's best if you give them the whole piece of satin. Then they will be happy." So she even had to make the uniforms of her aunt and the servant by herself. "Don't worry until you measure it." She often says she wants to give me this or that, but the result is that she always pays lip service but never delivers. For example, "Let's take a white leather bag," she said. "Miss Zhang, summer is here. I want to buy a white leather bag for you. You must not buy it yourself." In fact, she has many white leather bags at home, and they are not always available. They are all precious and extraordinary things, so it's okay to just pick one out and give it to me. But she said she must buy it and give it to me. Naturally, It was hard for me to ask for it. As a result, the autumn wind started, and she felt sorry for herself and said, Miss Zhang, last time I said I would give you a white leather bag, but unfortunately there are no good ones this year, so now I have to give you a gray one. I was very unhappy, thinking that if you hadn't said so earlier, I would have lost my mind. So I went to buy it. I couldn't trust you this time, so I went straight to pick out a gray leather bag. She saw it and said apologetically, really, I happen to be busy these days, so I just forgot. Miss Kai, I'll give you a black leather bag now. In the end, he didn't even give me a black leather bag. When she hears that a company has cheap products for sale, she always rushes to buy them for fear of missing the opportunity. Sometimes everyone wanted to buy the same thing, so she forced us to go with her. She even paid for what we deserved, and the rich took advantage of the poor. It was true. Her family also often changes servants. Although the servants work in her house, are well-fed, and have a lot of extra money, they still cannot stay for long because they don't regard them as human beings at all. Account and scolded them for being heartless and unwilling to repay their loyalty. You must know that people are always emotional animals. If you treat them so cruelly, how can they be loyal to you? The young master and his friends spend all day messing around outside, and sometimes he invites a group of fair-weather friends to his home for dinner to show off the luxury of his home. I look down on these flashy young men with contempt. When will we be able to break away from them and become independent? This is something even I don't know. One day, Master Dou was going to treat guests again. He suddenly had a sudden impulse and begged me to accompany the guests for him. Although I was unwilling to do so, I had to agree. There were many dandy young men in the audience, and they were full of dramas, which were sometimes downright embarrassing. Among them was a man named Shi Yalan, who was very drunk and well-spoken. What was even more impressive was that he seemed to have great sympathy and respect for me.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.